Well, I got a new report in this week to share with you guys, and this one, pleasant surprise here, come to me from an old acquaintance that I knew way back in the day, a fellow named Mike Metters, and I knew this guy from way back in the music store days, from the early '90s, and back in that time. And anyway, he sent me an email this last week to share an account that was witnessed by his family when he was just a baby, and he gave me permission, obviously, to share his name and all. So in this account, there's multiple witnesses, and there's some very interesting behavioral traits that are recorded in this from the Bigfoot that was encountered by Mike's family. And with that being said, I'll jump right into it and kind of give my thoughts on it as I go. But he said, "Greetings, Dave. It's awesome to see you're still at it. I know when you know something, it's hard to turn your back on it." And yeah, that's for sure. And he said this incident here happened in November or December of 1975. He said the people present were my dad, his dad, my mother, my dad's sister, my dad's mother, and my cousin John. He said John was a toddler at the time. He said I was there too, but I was a newborn. And we'll get further into this. All this will be collaborated as he was an adult as well. But he said the encounter happened at the family's preferred fishing/camping spot. It's not a camping area properly so. He said, I don't know that there is actual camping areas there. Seems like there isn't. But he said this was the spot that the family went to for decades. We just called it John's Spot. And there's a whole story behind that too, which he didn't elaborate on that. But he said that they rolled in to this area on a Friday evening, and they didn't put any tents up at this time. They were simply bunking in the cars. Said two of them had station wagons, and of course that was when vehicles were gargantuan. Any of you listeners out there that grew up in the early and mid 70s, you'll know. I mean, we call them now, we see them, we call them affectionately boat cars, because they literally were big. I mean, a station wagon at that time, you could pretty much sleep a family in the back of them. But anyway, he said on the night that they arrived, they started a fire at a quote, base camp about 40 feet from the water's edge. And he said later that night, the family heard stomping coming from the ridge line across the river and right in front of them. Let me back up a second and give the location here. This is in the Kiamichi Mountains where this took place. He said they fished until about 2 a.m., then they sacked out. They said that throughout the night they occasionally heard stomping sounds that no one could identify. He said his grandpa was of the opinion that it was a bear that was stalking them. And he said no one else thought to question that. He says no one at this time was a Bigfoot believer or even a Bigfoot considerer. He said, if that's a word. You know, the next day they did their thing throughout the day. They fished most of the day, and said later it started to drizzle that evening, and around midnight they started to hear stomping on the opposite ridge. So Dad said that they could follow it exactly where it was going. The steps were that defined and clear. They heard it walk off to the point that they no longer heard it. He said the men stayed down at the water, and the women and children went to the cars to get out of the rain and put us kids to bed. As the night progressed, they heard thumping and banging. Eventually, Dad was able to notice that it had crossed onto their side of the river. So he said and he used the term big fella, started to come down the hill that was closest to the cars, but it wasn't being sneaky at all. He said it very slowly made its way down. It would stomp, as if intentionally. It would bash logs, all the while making its way down the hill. So he said his dad and grandpa decided it was time to get back to the cars. As they were struggling to get their gear and get up to the cars, in the hustle they dropped the ice chest and it busted all over the ground. But when they got to their cars, everyone was getting pretty spooked. So he said Dad grabbed his .45 and went out and just listened, him and his dad and his grandpa. All the while, of course, not knowing what this was. what had them spooked was that they could tell it was definitely bipedal in the way it was walked. He said it was walking on 2 feet. They didn't have any doubt of that, and they knew it. He said as they sat in the rain, staring up and down the road and hill, they heard the, quote, critter stop not too far from the road, still up the hill a bit. Then it started making a new noise. What my mom and dad both said sounded like it was kicking a log over and over. It was very close to them at this point, and they continued to listen and watch. Now, I know several of you folks that listen to my, that watch my YouTube channel have seen me do filming in the Kiamichi Mountains, so you know how thick that vegetation is in there. So something really can be right up close to the road, and you shining flashlights into the brush and not see very far in, and that's what they were experienced. And he said they continued to listen and watch. When it stopped the kicking, Dad and Grandpa walked down the road to close to where they thought they would be in line with the, quote, critter, or in front of it where they only had to look up the hill to look directly at the sound. They didn't hear it walking anymore, but they did hear some faint movement, and said then they heard a crack of a small twig directly in front of them across the road, and he said there was a hedgerow that ran most of the length of the road. Shortly after they heard the snap, the brush in front of them shook slightly and simply parted, and a grayish, and he quoted his parent, called it a grayish monkey man face, peered through the brush about 3 feet above them, looking down at them. Needless to say, they didn't stay there to introduce themselves and hightailed it to the cars. They said that the face looked about as surprised as they did. As they ran, it too ran, but it went in the opposite direction. Though they were scared, Dad said the only time he had ever been as fearful was during Vietnam and not since. They did not leave. They stayed at the cars and listened. They heard the, quote, again, critter stomp and occasionally hit some trees along the ridge line all night long. This time it was the ridge above them as opposed to the night before when it was on the ridge across the creek. When the sun rose, so did their bravery. Dad, his mom, and his dad went to the point where they had the face-to-face meeting and went through the hedges. They were able to track the critter. Now, they didn't elaborate on how in this email, whether they found footprints or just evidence of where it walked. He did not elaborate on that. But he said they followed it to the point where they believed it was kicking a stump, the one I mentioned earlier, and what they found was a fallen tree that had started to rot, but in the middle of it, it appeared as if it had been kicked over and over, and it was very fresh. He said they eventually packed up and left that day. And he would go on to talk about how he verified that. And a lot of what he wrote here is just kind of, like I said, I haven't seen this gentleman in well over 20 years, so he was kind of catching up on just some small talk in some of these pages. But I emailed him back and said, Mike, can I use your story on my YouTube channel? I said, it's got some very interesting things regarding the noises you heard, or that your family heard, as well as seeing its face peering through the trees at them. And I'll just read verbatim what he wrote back to me. And part of this very, very important. He said, "Hey Dave, you can of course use the story as well as my name." And listen to this part. "The truth is more important than ridicule." And I tell you, you know, anytime somebody puts their story out there like this and says, yes, use my name, they are taking the chance of somebody ridiculing them for this. So, you know, hats up to Mike for your courage in just telling me to go ahead and use your name. And as you know, I've said over and over again, if you want me to share a report on this channel, be happy to do it. And if you want me to use your name, I will. If you don't want me to use your name or location, just say so and I will not. Mike, on this in this case, asked me to use his name. So he said, I assure you, wait a minute, let me go on here, past the just small talk. He said, the truth is more important than ridicule. He says, when let me see, I remember when hearing Dad recount this story, every time he told it, he always kind of emphasized, or maybe not emphasized, but he never once left out that the stalker was walking the ridges. When I got my mother to tell me about it, she too mentioned that it was seemingly on the ridge, but it was never so far that they couldn't hear it. She said that she felt like they were being hunted, and here he offers his thoughts. He said, I don't personally believe that. I think it was probing their position to see what they would do, but it was not making a secret about its presence either. It was most likely just curious, and this is Mike's thoughts here. He believes it was most likely just curious, or they were in its territory and it wanted to see who and what they were. They didn't feel threatened, but they were not at all comfortable because they all knew it was something walking on two legs and that it was very big. He said, I tried to get Dad to estimate the size, but he said it would be impossible due to the way the terrain was. Other than when they saw its face and head, when they were above the plane that it was on, not by much, a foot or so, he says, yet the face was approximately 3 feet above theirs. So that would be, well, your average person in the 5, 6 or so to 6 feet tall. It's 3 foot above theirs. That way you get the idea. Very large thing. They were all definitely scared, as I do not doubt that I would be. As sick as it might sound, I rather wish it had happened when I was older so that I could have experienced it, but at the same time, maybe I was lucky to have been spared the fear and confusion. If you need any more info, let me know. I can contact my aunt. She's the only one living that was there that weekend. I can see if she can clarify any confusion. Thank you, Dave. So, and of course he signed it Mike Metters. And again, I know Mike from way back, so it was a pleasant surprise to get the email from him. But now my thoughts on this. What was it so interested in them? Part of it possibly that he was an infant and his cousin was a toddler. So as we have found, or as I've found in my research into this subject, as well as the reports concerning Mark from the Livewire channel and the Bigfoot activity on his place, these creatures seem to be fascinated, curious, drawn to, however you want to put it, small children when they're around, and to just seem to not be able to resist coming close to see what's going on, or I don't know what their intentions. I'm not going to guess, but for whatever reason, small children tend to attract their presence if they're in the woods there. So anyway, this very, very good account here. It was witnessed by multiple people. His dad and his grandpa saw it face to face in the brush in front of them. All of them heard it. Stomping, kicking, hitting trees, behavior that I have witnessed myself concerning the Sasquatch creatures. They didn't elaborate again how they tracked it and found the log that was over that it had been kicking on, whether it was footprints or just the evidence of it going through the brush. From personal experience, being in that area a lot, which right now it's like where I'm standing, it's 32 degrees. It's pretty cold here, but it's going to be warming up, and I'm getting ready to start going back down into the Kiamichis here pretty quick. But the way the terrain in there, most everything under the forest is covered in thick leaves and pine needles and stuff, and it's very hard to see footprints in it. But you can see when something big has been going through this stuff. So that, like I say, they didn't elaborate on how it was tracked. But my thoughts on the kicking, the stomping, the bashing against trees and whatever, I think it just wanted them to know it was there, and more than likely just wanted them to leave. But then there's the other aspect that goes into it, is the two very small children there at the same time. So whatever the reasons, whatever goes through a Bigfoot's mind, I don't know. But it was not trying to hide its presence. It was obviously trying to let them know that it was there. And it stalked them for those 2 days that they were there. Now, so a lot of this stuff that they're talking about, I've experienced myself in the form of the breaking limbs, the hitting trees and stuff like that in the woods. And I've also experienced the rock throwing, which Mike didn't say anything like that happened. But I've never experienced outright aggression by these things. More like, you know, we know you're here and we'd rather you go away type thing. But anyway, this is a very interesting report. And again, I want to say thanks to Mike to taking the time to reach out to me and send me this report. And I hope y'all have enjoyed it. And if anyone else has anything that they would like to report, you can send me an email at bigfootandmore@yahoo.com. That's bigfootandmore@yahoo.com. And I'd be happy to share it on this channel. If you don't want me to share it and just want to send me an email so I'll have it for my records, I'd be glad to do that too. But anyway, as always, if you like what I'm doing with this channel, I'd encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. And I want to send out a special thank you to Kerry Arnold and his friend Brad from Bigfoot Odyssey, since I was interviewed by them on their Researcher Report show, as well as being interviewed in the documentary that they recently shot on Mark from the Livewire YouTube channel's property. I've had an influx of a lot of new subscribers to this channel, so I want to say a special thank you to Kerry and the crew from Bigfoot Odyssey. If y'all are not familiar with them, I encourage you to check out that channel, Bigfoot Odyssey. Kerry and them have some very good interviews and documentaries that they've made on that. So anyway, that being said, that's what I've got for this week. And so until next time, you guys take care.